Hello and welcome to Lessons in Logic, video number 23. And now we're finally going to introduce a nice method of testing categorical syllogisms for validity. Although at this point, there's surprisingly little to say about it. We've already done nearly all the work necessary for using this method. All right, so categorical syllogism has two premises, one conclusion, a total of 3 terms. Each premise and a conclusion should be a categorical proposition. Once you get a categorical syllogism into standard form, that is to say, take each of its propositions and put it into one of the 4 available standard forms, all X or Y, the A form, no X or Y, the E form, some X or Y, the I form, or some X or not Y, the O form. Get every proposition into standard form, make sure there's no unnecessary use of synonyms, and you have a total of 3 terms in the argument, and write the conclusion last and the premises first. Oh, and the premise that contains the minor term, being the first term appearing in the conclusion, is written second, minor premise second, major premise first, the major premise being the premise containing the major term, that being the second term of the conclusion. Once you have all that in place, then testing the categorical syllogism for validity is very easy. It's very easy to see whether this is one of those arguments whose structure of reasoning, or whose form, or whose pattern of reasoning, if it's one of those arguments whose form or pattern of reasoning has the quality that its premises guarantee its conclusion. Let me say that a little more succinctly. Once you put the categorical syllogism into standard form, doing all the stuff I've been talking about in earlier videos, then it's very easy to test it for validity, which just means to find out if the argument is such that its premises cannot be true and its conclusion false at the same time. If it is, that's always going to be because of the pattern of the argument, the shape of the argument, the structure of argument, the form of the argument, the way we're reasoning about things, not the things we're reasoning about. So once we put it into standard form, all we have is the form, or at least we're able to zoom in on the form more easily. And actually, we will have nothing but the form. Or at least we'll have a space where we put it into standard form, but we'll only have the form. As illustrated in the last video, putting it into standard form in the best way would be using the scheme of abbreviation, where you'll use SP and M to symbolize the minor term, the major term, and the middle term. That's the first term in the conclusion, the second term in the conclusion, and then the term that appears once in each premise. Once you put it into standard form using a scheme of abbreviation, you'll have an S equals something, P equals something, M equals something. You'll have that explanation of what symbolizes what, how SP and M symbolize certain terms, and then you'll state the argument using those symbols. And by the time you've got to state the argument using those symbols, that is nothing but form, nothing but pattern, nothing but structure, nothing but the shape of the argument, nothing but the way we're reasoning about things. And then we can just look at that stuff to know whether the argument is valid. And there's 3 major methods we want to use: the rules method, the Venn diagramming method, and the mood figure method. And this video will introduce the mood figure method, but at this point it's terribly easy. 2 videos back in the introduction to categorical syllogisms, we looked at mood and figure. So mood is just 3 letters, 1 for each of the statements in the argument, 1 for each of the premises, and 1 for the conclusion. 2 premises, 1 conclusion, 3 capital letters, 1 for each, and those capital letters are A, E, I, or O for the first premise, A, E, I, or O for the second premise, and A, E, I, or O for the conclusion. And just to illustrate, if I say no politicians are, I'm tired of talking about politicians. Let's go back to rodents. No guinea pigs or hamsters. All hamsters make good pets, therefore no guinea pigs make good pets. I wasn't in standard form. All hamsters are good pets. No guinea pigs or hamsters, therefore no guinea pigs are good pets. There, I think that was standard form. S equals guinea pigs, P equals good pets, M equals hamsters. I had an all hamsters are good pets, no guinea pigs are good pets. No, all hamsters are good pets, no guinea pigs or hamsters, therefore no guinea pigs are good pets. A, E. All, no, and now. All guinea pigs are, all hamsters are good pets, no guinea pigs or hamsters, therefore no guinea pigs are good pets. It's an A form proposition and all, and then it's two E form propositions, no and no. So that's AEE, that's the figure of that syllogism. The figure, sorry, the mood, that's the mood of the syllogism. The mood is whichever of AEIRO is for the first premise, whichever of AEIRO is the form of the first premise, whichever of AEIRO is the form of the second premise, and whichever AEIRO is the form of the conclusion. AAA, EEE, EIO, OEI, AOO, LAI, etc., etc. Those are our different moods. And there's four figures referring to the placement of the middle term. The middle term occurs once in each premise. It's either first in the first premise or second in the first premise. It's either first in the second premise or second in the second premise. So there's four possible figures. Figure one, it's first and then second. Figure two, it's second and second. Figure three, it's first and first. Figure four, it's third and fourth. Let's do that again. Figure one, it's first and second. Figure two, it's second, second. Figure three, it's first, first. Figure four, it's second, first. There. Those are our four figures. So every categorical syllogism will have a mood and a figure, and it's very easy to figure out what are the mood and figure once you put it into standard form. And there are 256 possible combinations of mood and figure. Most of them are invalid. One very good exercise is to memorize all of them, in particular, memorize the invalid list. But I've never done that. I think few have. I'm sure any number of people have, but it's a minority of those who study logic. A much simpler exercise and a perfectly good exercise is to memorize the list of valid forms. Your teacher may need you to do that if you're taking a logic class, but I don't care. I don't think I've usually had my students memorize it. I think I just let them have a list, but it's fine to memorize it. It's a good exercise. So the valid ones are given names by medieval logicians. We'll get to that shortly. One very good way, then, of testing categorical syllogisms for validity is simply to put it into standard form and then identify the mood and figure. The application of the method is very simple. Step one, put it into standard form. Step two, identify mood. Step three, identify figure. Step five, look at the list. Or if you memorize the list, check it off mentally against the list. See if your syllogism is EIO figure 2 and therefore valid, or AAA figure 4 and therefore invalid, etc., etc. Now, without going into existential import, I remind you that we're using the modern perspective as of now. If we were using the Aristotelian perspective, we would welcome an additional 9 forms of categorical syllogism as being valid. We only have 15 valid forms out of the 256. So 15 valid forms, 241 are invalid. So my counsel would be, by all means, memorize the 15 good ones. Don't bother memorizing the 241 bad ones. So we want to practice with a scheme of abbreviation. We'll get to that shortly. Here is the list of valid ones. In figure 1, AAA, EAE, AII, EIO. Those are the valid moods for figure 1. Figure 2, EAE, AEE, EIO, AOO. Figure 3, IAI, AII, OAO, and EIO. And figure 4, AEE, IAI, and EIO. Now, you might notice that I have written here this question. Why do you think EIO is valid in all 4 figures? I think I might just leave that question. Yeah, I'm going to leave that question. I didn't even notice why. A student mentioned it to me once, year 2010, I think it was. So there's no reason I should have to tell you. I leave that as, I don't know, YouTube homework. Explain it to yourselves. Explain it to me in comments if you're interested. Why is EIO valid in all 4 figures? All right. These are the valid forms: EIO in any figure, AAA in figure 1 only, AII in figure 1 or 3, EAE in figure 1 or 2, AEE in figure 2 and 4, AOO in figure 2, IAI in figure 3 and figure 4, OAO in figure 3, and I think that covers it. All right, so put your syllogism into standard form, see if it's on the list. No, put your syllogism into standard form, state the mood, state the figure, and then look at the list, and then if it's on the list, say valid. If it's not on the list, say invalid, and you're done. Now here are the names. The valid ones in figure 1, wrapping some Latin names around those 3 vowels, AAA, EAE, AII, EIO. The names are Barbara, Celarent, Darii, and Ferio. For figure 2, our names are Cesare Camestres Festino Barocco. For figure 3, our names are Dicemis Datisi Bocardo and Ferison. For figure 4, our names are Calemes Dimatis and Fresison. A-E-E-I-A-I-E-I-O. All right. I've often thought, I don't have a logic textbook handy. I don't have one in this office. I've often thought that we need some people to dress up like the monks in Monty Python and the Holy Grail and walk around campus chanting chanting Barbara Celarent, Darii, Ferio, and the rest of it to the tune of Pia Jesu Domine, whatever it is that they sing in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and hit themselves in the face with the logic textbooks at the right moment, and achieve YouTube immortality by chanting the names of the valid syllogisms. I don't have any particular singing skill, or maybe I do it myself. Anyway, let's practice with a scheme of abbreviation. And we'll do 1 or 2 arguments and be done, because we've set it up so nicely that it's very easy. And again, that's largely the point. We do so much work learning how to put syllogisms into standard form. First put the propositions into standard form, then put the syllogisms into standard form. We do so much work there, and a little extra work learning things like mood and figure, that by the time we've done all that work, there's almost nothing to do. Here's how you test a categorical syllogism for validity. Let me think of a syllogism worth testing for validity. Well, I don't like this. It's too close to standard form. What did I just say? Leibnizians, all right, here's our argument, not in standard form. Leibnizians are never Marxists. Marxists are always materialists. There we go. It follows that Leibnizians are never materialists. Here's our argument, not in standard form. Leibnizians are never Marxists, and Marxists are always materialists. It follows that Leibnizians are never materialists. So now let's symbolize the argument. Now I could write it out in standard form this way. No Leibnizians are Marxists. All Marxists are materialists, so no Marxists are materialists. Sorry, that was not right. No Leibnizians. Actually, that's still not standard form. I could write it in standard form this way. Do I have the same argument? I think I do. Leibnizians are never Marxists, and Marxists are always materialists. If Leibnizians are never materialists, all Marxists are materialists. No Leibnizians are Marxists, and no Leibnizians are materialists. That's standard form. Don't do it. My advice is don't do anything like that. You're done with that. That method is dead to you. In fact, it's not enough of a method. You're doing what that method is trying to achieve, but you're doing a lot more if you take my advice. From this point on, never do any of that. I mean, if you want to, if it entertains you, if it makes you happy, sure, write out the argument in standard form in that way. But this is better. First, symbolize the argument. Use S to represent the minor term. The minor term is the first term appearing in the conclusion. It is Leibnizians. And if you're thinking, what the heck is a Leibnizian? I say, great, you don't need to know. It's none of your business right now. Your business is to find out what is the structure of the argument, the pattern of the argument, what is the method of reasoning this argument uses. You don't even need to know what the argument's about. Forget all that. What you need to know is whether the premises guarantee a conclusion. If they do, then if this argument matters at all, you can go out and find out what a Leibnizian is and find out if the premises are also true. Right now, we're taking all information about whether premises are true or false, and we're shoving it aside because we don't care. This is logic class. We only care about whether the premises provide good support for the conclusion. That's what logic does. All right, Leibnizians is our minor term, the first term of the conclusion. Materialists is the major term, the second term of the conclusion. The middle term is the one that occurs in each premise, and that would be Marxists. It's sheer coincidence that Marxists starts with M. So S equals Leibnizians, P equals materialists, M equals Marxists. And now write out the argument again using this symbol. And the symbol is, the symbolized argument would be for the conclusion. So no LRM. Leibnizians are never materialists means no SRM. Oh my goodness, there I am using the wrong capital letters. All right, our original argument is Leibnizians are never Marxists. Marxists are always materialists. It follows that Leibnizians are never materialists. Our minor term symbolized by S is Leibnizians. Our major term symbolized by P is materialists. Our minor term symbolized by M is Marxists. Our argument then has the conclusion, no SRP. Leibnizians are never materialists. No SRP. Our premises then. Our first premise is the one containing the major term, which is materialist. Marxists are always materialists. That means all M are P. And then finally, to put the argument in standard form, we symbolize the minor premise, which is Leibnizians are never Marxists, no SRM. There we go. All M are P, no SRM, no SRP. That is our argument in standard form. Well, accompanied by the scheme of abbreviation. But now we can ignore everything that came before it and just look at that lovely pattern. All M are P, no SRM, so no SRP. So now we state the mood. Then we state the figure. Then we state whether it's valid or invalid. I'm going to delete one of those that I just typed up. All M are P, no SRM, so no SRP. What is the mood? The mood is, first premise is an A form proposition, all. Second premise is no. Next statement, the conclusion is also no. So the mood is AEE. And then the figure is 1, figure 1. Because M, the middle term, appears first in the first premise and second in the second premise. That makes it figure 1. So now, is AEE figure 1 a valid syllogism form? Nope. It's invalid. And that's it. That's how you test that categorical syllogism for validity. And again, once you get this far, knowing how to put it into standard form, knowing what mood and figure are, the rest is very simple, not very time consuming. And if I don't waste any time, if I don't beat around the bush much, I should be able to just about type up another one in very little time. So now here's the pattern I'm going to use. Actually, I don't know if I like that pattern. There we go. I like that pattern. Here's the pattern I'm going to use for tackling my next syllogism. Here, and everyone got confused as I was saying here without having everything typed up in order yet. Let's put it in blue. Maybe that will help. Here in blue is my pattern for testing my next syllogism for validity. First, the syllogism. Now, if you're doing some logic homework, this will probably be in your textbook. This part will be in your textbook. But this is what you would want to write on your homework paper. S equals something, P equals something, M equals something. Premise, therefore conclusion, mood, figure, and then whether valid or invalid based on whether it's on this list of valid ones or not. All right, so now what's a good syllogism I can test for validity? Let's see. All right, I think this will do. Kids who study the trivium are happier because people who study the trivium know grammar and logic, and people who know grammar and logic are happier. All right, so my kids might object to one of these, one or more of these statements. Maybe someday they'll admit what I know. Kids who study the trivium are happier because people who study the trivium know grammar and logic, and people who know grammar and logic are happier. All right. So look at the language here. Statement, because, statement, and statement. That means conclusion, because, premise, and premise. So the first thing you should always do is find the conclusion. The conclusion is kids who study the trivium are happier. Now, I want to pay attention to what my terms are. My S term is going to be kids who study the trivium, or people who study the trivium. If you don't know what this is about, I say, great, doesn't matter. You don't need to know what the trivium is. What you need to know is whether the structure of the argument is such that the premises guarantee the conclusion. So in my conclusion, I have all S are, looks like I have an all S or P. All kids who study the trivium are people who are happier, or happier people. But then my other premises are going to say something about people who study the trivium, people who know grammar and logic. Well, people who know grammar and logic, I think that's going to be our middle term. But kids who study the trivium, that's the minor term. It's going to turn up in another premise. Kids who study the trivium are happier. So this is our conclusion. Let's bold the conclusion and put it in red. People who study the trivium know grammar and logic. This is going to be our minor premise, I think. And the minor premise, let's italicize and put that in purple. And then major premise, people who know grammar and logic are happier. Let's underline that and put it in a third color, orange. Sure, why not? So now let's look at the purple premise. People who study the trivium know grammar and logic. It doesn't have the same minor term as what I've been using, kids who study the trivium. So do I want to say kids who study the trivium for a minor term, or people who study the trivium? Well, that's a good question. There are two ways you could approach an argument like this. You could take it as a Sorites, and we'll talk about Sorites in a subsequent video. That means an argument that has more than one term, more than three terms. And that means basically a chain of syllogisms. So if that's the case, you would treat the argument this way. There's an extra term here. There's S, kids who study the trivium, P, happier people, and M, people who know grammar and logic. Then there's an extra term which you would need a new symbol for. I don't know, Z. And the argument then would be all kids who study the trivium are people who study the trivium, all people who study the trivium are people who know grammar and logic, all people who know grammar and logic are happier people, something like that. And it would be a four-term thing. And we can't do it as a syllogism because it's not a syllogism. It's two syllogisms. We'll look at Sorites later. For now, let's say this. Let's do this the easier way. And let's just treat these as synonymous. Kids who study the trivium and people who study the trivium. Now, I could then say that the conclusion is about people who study the trivium, but the conclusion is about kids, so let's not do that. So instead, let's just say kids who study the trivium know grammar and logic is going to be our minor premise. So what's the minor premise? The minor premise is all S are M. All kids who study the trivium are people who know grammar and logic. There, that's our purple premise, the minor one. Let's keep the color coding going. Now, our conclusion is going to be all SRP, I think. This sure feels like a nice Barber syllogism. I don't want to jump ahead here, though. Our conclusion is all S or P, all kids who study the trivium are happier people. Our minor premise is all S or M, all kids who study the trivium are people who know grammar and logic. And then our major premise is going to be all MRP. All people who know grammar and logic are happier people. So now, there we go. And now we can just take all of this and ignore it. Don't delete it like I'm doing here. Rather, just scroll down. If you properly put the argument into standard form, you've taken this argument here, the original argument, you've given it in standard form by giving the scheme of abbreviation plus the restatement of the argument using those symbols. Once you've gotten to that point, you can ignore everything except the restatement using those symbols. Now that restatement is nothing but pattern of reasoning, nothing but the way we're reasoning about things. And you can ignore everything else, and you should, because now it's none of your business. None of your business, because at this point, your one job, insert you had one job meme, is to, and the meme wouldn't fit here anyway. Anyway, now you have one job, and the one job is to see if that way of reasoning about things is such that the premises guarantee the conclusion. And ta-da, it is such, because the mood is AAA. These are three all statements. The figure is figure 1 because M appears first in the first premise and second in the second premise, and that makes it figure 1. And AAA1 is a valid mood figure combination. That's how you test a categorical syllogism for validity using the mood figure method. Now, your logic teacher, if you're taking a class, may have particular preferences. Maybe the teacher wants you to write it out the way I'm advising you not to. Write out all people who know grammar and logic are happier people. All kids who study the trivium are people who know grammar and logic, and all kids who study the trivium are happier people. Maybe your teacher wants you to write all that out. Maybe your teacher wants you to name this and say it's a Barbara syllogism. Name the pattern. It's a Barbara pattern. Maybe for the last one, invalid, your teacher wants you to say it doesn't have a Latin name or something like that. I don't know. I don't care. I'm giving you the simple way of doing it. And there's a very good chance it will be very similar to any instructions from your teacher if you're taking a class. But be careful, your teacher may have specific instructions. Anyway, thanks for watching. I think probably in the next video we'll talk about the Venn diagramming method for categorical syllogisms, which is pretty awesome. See you then.